I'm Natalie Hartwell, 28 years old, living in Burlington, Vermont. On Christmas Eve, surrounded by flickering candles and the scent of pine, my father stood up at our family dinner table and announced he was removing me from his will because my sister, Tessa, had convinced him I was secretly planning to steal the family business. The crystal glasses trembled as his fist hit the mahogany table. Tessa's satisfied smirk glowed in the candlelight, and the antique ornaments on our 12-foot tree seemed to shatter along with 28 years of my life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching. If this resonated, don't miss out on subscribing because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will completely change how you think about this topic. That night, I realized the sister I'd protected my entire life had orchestrated my destruction with surgical precision. If it were you, would you fight back against a sibling who turned your own father against you? Or would you walk away to preserve what little family you had left? Stay with me because what I discovered about Tessa's secret life changed everything. And by New Year's Day, she was the one facing consequences she never saw coming. The evening had started like every Christmas Eve for the past decade. Our family's sprawling colonial home in the Champlain Valley was decorated with the same heirloom ornaments my grandmother had collected, the same garland draped along the mahogany banister, the same golden lights twinkling against fresh snow outside. Dad had insisted on his traditional toast before dinner, raising his glass of aged bourbon with the gravity of a man who took every family ritual seriously. "To the Hartwell legacy," he'd said, his voice carrying across the dining room that had hosted 5 generations of our family, and to ensuring it continues in the right hands. I should have noticed the way Tessa's eyes gleamed when he said, right hands. I should have caught the meaningful look she exchanged with our stepmother, Patricia, but I was too busy carving the prime rib, too focused on making sure everything was perfect for what I thought would be another peaceful family Christmas. The Hartwell family had built their fortune through 3 generations of furniture manufacturing. What started as my great-grandfather's small woodworking shop in downtown Burlington had grown into Hartwell Artisan Furniture, a company worth $12 million that supplied custom pieces to luxury hotels in high-end homes across New England. Dad had spent 40 years of his life expanding the business, and everyone always assumed it would eventually pass to me. After all, I was the one who'd studied business administration at the University of Vermont specifically to join the company. I was the one who'd spent every summer since age 16 learning every aspect of the operation, from the sawmill floor to the executive offices. I was the one who'd moved back home after college instead of pursuing opportunities in Boston or New York because Dad said the family business needed me. Tessa, on the other hand, had shown zero interest in furniture, woodworking, or business management. She'd studied art history at a prestigious college in California, spent 2 years backpacking through Europe after graduation, and currently worked as a freelance photographer in Portland, Maine. She visited maybe 3 times a year, usually when she needed money or when major holidays demanded her presence. But as I learned that night, Tessa had been much busier during those visits than I ever realized. The conversation at dinner had been pleasant enough. Patricia, Dad's second wife of 5 years, chatted about her charity work organizing fundraisers for the Burlington food shelf. My Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother and business partner, shared stories about his recent trip to North Carolina to scout new suppliers. Tessa regaled us with tales of her latest photography assignment, documenting historic lighthouses along the Maine coast. I talked about the expansion proposal I'd been developing for months, a plan to add a new product line of eco-friendly furniture that could tap into the growing market for sustainable home goods. Dad had seemed interested when I'd first pitched the idea in November, asking thoughtful questions about manufacturing costs and target demographics. The millennial market is really driving demand for environmentally conscious products, I explained, passing around copies of the market research I'd compiled. We could potentially increase our revenue by 30% within 2 years if we position ourselves correctly. Dad nodded thoughtfully, but I noticed he didn't ask his usual follow-up questions. Uncle Robert flipped through the pages with genuine interest, but Patricia seemed distracted, checking her phone repeatedly under the table. And Tessa,
Tessa watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between amusement and pity. "That's very ambitious, Natalie," Dad said, finally, setting down the proposal without really examining it. "We'll need to discuss it more after the holidays." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was Christmas Eve, family time. Business could wait. The shift came just as Patricia was serving dessert, her famous bourbon pecan pie that had become a holiday tradition. Dad cleared his throat in that particular way that meant he had something important to say, and the room fell quiet. "Before we finish our evening, there's something I need to address with the family." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Uncle Robert looked up sharply from his pie. Patricia's face went carefully neutral, while Tessa leaned forward with what looked like anticipation.
"I've been doing some thinking about the future of Hartwell Artisan," Dad continued, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for serious business discussions. "About succession planning and ensuring the company remains in capable hands." My heart started beating faster. This was it. The conversation we'd been building toward for years. Dad was finally going to officially name me as his successor, make it clear to everyone that I would inherit control of the family business. "After careful consideration and some recent revelations about family dynamics," he said, his eyes meeting mine across the table, "I've decided to make some changes to my estate planning." The word revelations hit me like ice water. What revelations? What was he talking about? Dad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I've had my attorney draft a new will. Effective immediately, Natalie will be removed as beneficiary of both my personal estate and my shares in Hartwell Artisan Furniture." The room went silent, except for the crackling of logs in the fireplace. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that your sister has opened my eyes to some uncomfortable truths about your motivations, Natalie, about your real plans for this family and this business." I looked around the table desperately. Uncle Robert's face had gone pale. Patricia was studying her hands. And Tessa was trying to suppress a smile, her eyes bright with triumph. "What plans?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, I don't understand what you're talking about." That's when Tessa spoke up, her voice dripping with false concern. "Natalie, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We all know about the meetings you've been having, about your real intentions for the company." "What meetings?" The words came out as a croak. Dad's face hardened. "The meetings with our competitors, Natalie. The conversations you've been having about selling trade secrets, about undermining this family's legacy for your own financial gain." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table, my vision blurring. "That's not true! Dad, that's absolutely not true! I would never—" "Don't lie to me," he said, his voice rising to a roar that made the crystal glasses tremble. "Tessa has proof, Natalie, documentation of your betrayal." I turned to stare at my sister, this woman I'd shared a childhood with, this person I'd defended countless times when Dad criticized her choices. She met my gaze steadily, no longer hiding her satisfaction. "I'm sorry you forced me to tell him," she said softly, "but family loyalty goes both ways, Natalie, and you chose money over family." The lies were so complete, so detailed, so devastating, that for a moment I couldn't even find words to defend myself. How do you prove a negative? How do you convince someone that something never happened when they've already decided you're guilty? "Get out," he said, his voice cold and final. "Get out of my house. You're no longer my daughter, and you're no longer part of this family." The room spun around me as I stood on shaking legs. 28 years of love, of shared memories, of building a life around this family and this business, gone in the span of 5 minutes. As I walked toward the door, my coat clutched in trembling hands,
I caught Tessa's reflection in the hallway mirror. She was no longer bothering to hide her smile. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding or a family fight that could be resolved with time and conversation. This was a calculated destruction, planned and executed by someone who knew exactly how to weaponize a father's love against his daughter. And as the door slammed behind me and I stepped into the bitter Vermont cold, I made a promise to myself. I would find out exactly what Tessa had done, and I would make sure she faced the consequences. The truth was about to become my weapon. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. The bitter December wind cut through my coat as I sat in my car outside Dad's house, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't get the key into the ignition. Through the frosted windows, I could see the warm glow of our family's Christmas celebration continuing without me, as if I had never existed at all. The sight of those golden lights that had once meant home and safety now felt like mockery. I finally managed to start the engine and drove aimlessly through Burlington's empty streets, past houses decorated with twinkling lights and inflatable Santas, past families whose Christmas Eves weren't exploding into betrayal and accusations. My phone buzzed repeatedly, texts I couldn't bear to read, calls I couldn't bring myself to answer. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of my small apartment complex on Pine Street, the weight of what just happened crashed over me like an avalanche. I wasn't just losing an inheritance. I was losing my entire identity, my purpose, my future. Everything I had built my life around was gone. But as I sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of my family, I forced myself to think clearly. This couldn't be random. Tessa's accusations were too specific, too detailed, too perfectly crafted to destroy me. She hadn't just stumbled into this opportunity. She had created it.
To understand how we got here, I need to take you back to the beginning, to the patterns I was too blind to see until tonight made them impossible to ignore. Tessa and I weren't always enemies. Growing up, I was the older sister who protected her, who made excuses for her, who cleaned up her messes without thinking twice about it. She was 3 years younger, blonde and charming where I was brunette and serious, artistic where I was practical, beloved by everyone who met her. Our mother died when I was 12 and Tessa was 9, a sudden heart attack that left Dad devastated, and 2 young girls trying to navigate a world that suddenly felt dangerous and unpredictable. In those dark months after the funeral, I stepped into the role of caretaker almost automatically. I made sure Tessa got to school, helped her with homework, braided her hair for pictures, and held her when she cried for our mother. Dad threw himself into work as a way to cope with his grief, spending longer and longer hours at the furniture factory. The business became his sanctuary, the place where he could control outcomes and create something beautiful from raw materials. He'd take me there on weekends, teaching me about wood grains and joinery techniques, showing me financial reports and production schedules. "This is our legacy, Natalie," he would say, running his hand along the smooth surface of a handcrafted dining table. "Someday, this will all be yours to protect and grow." Tessa never showed any interest in those weekend trips to the factory. She preferred to stay home with her sketchbooks and art supplies, creating fantastical drawings of fairies and castles. When Dad tried to include her in business conversations, her eyes would glaze over. When he explained the importance of quality craftsmanship, she would nod politely and then disappear to her room. "She's just different," I would tell Dad when he expressed frustration about Tessa's lack of engagement. "She's an artist. She sees the world differently than we do." I believed that then. I believed that Tessa's disinterest in the family business was simply a matter of different personalities and passions. I never considered that it might be something else entirely. Resentment, jealousy, a growing anger at being the daughter who wasn't chosen to carry on the family legacy.
The pattern became clear during our teenage years, though I was too loyal to see it at the time. When Tessa got caught shoplifting at 16, I was the one who convinced Dad not to press charges against the store. When she crashed Dad's car after sneaking out to a party, I covered for her by claiming I had given her permission to borrow it. When her grades started slipping senior year, threatening her college prospects, I spent hours tutoring her and even wrote one of her English papers. Each time, she would cry and apologize and promise to do better. Each time, I believed her tears were genuine, and each time, Dad would soften and forgive her, often rewarding her improvement with expensive gifts or special privileges. But there were moments, small ones that I dismissed at the time, when I caught glimpses of something else. The flash of satisfaction in her eyes when Dad criticized my choice to study business instead of pursuing a more creative field. The way she would subtly undermine my ideas during family dinners, asking innocent questions that made my plans sound naive or unrealistic. The times I would find her in Dad's study, looking through business documents she claimed to have no interest in. "I was just curious," she would say when I asked what she was doing. "I wanted to understand what makes you and Dad so passionate about furniture." I wanted to believe her curiosity was genuine, that maybe she was finally developing an interest in the family business. I even encouraged her, sharing articles about sustainable manufacturing and explaining market trends I thought might appeal to her environmental sensibilities. What I didn't realize was that Tessa was studying our business not to join it, but to destroy it, and me along with it. The signs became more obvious during college, but I was too focused on my own goals to connect the dots. While I was earning my business degree and working summer internships to gain experience, Tessa was cultivating a very different kind of education. She majored in art history, but her real area of expertise became manipulation and strategic planning. She would call me regularly during those years, asking seemingly innocent questions about my classes, my internships, my relationships with professors and industry contacts. I thought she was just being a supportive sister, interested in my life. I shared everything with her, my career goals, my networking strategies, even my insecurities about whether I was smart enough to eventually run a multi-million-dollar company. "You're so much more capable than you realize," she would tell me during those late-night phone calls. "Dad is lucky to have a daughter who cares so much about preserving what he's built." Her words felt like validation, like the sisterly support I desperately needed as I navigated the pressure of living up to the Hartwell name. I never questioned why she suddenly seemed so interested in business strategy, or why she would ask detailed questions about my internship projects and the people I was meeting in the industry.
After college, the dynamic shifted again. I moved back to Burlington and threw myself into learning every aspect of Hartwell artisan furniture. I started in production, spending months on the factory floor learning how our craftsmen transformed raw lumber into beautiful, functional pieces. I worked in shipping and receiving, in quality control, in customer service. I wanted to understand our business from the ground up, to earn the respect of our employees through competence rather than just bearing the family name. Dad was proud of my dedication, often telling business associates about my commitment to learning the company from every angle. "Natalie doesn't just want to inherit a business," he would say. "She wants to earn it." Meanwhile, Tessa was building her own life in Portland, working as a freelance photographer and cultivating an image as the free-spirited artistic daughter who had chosen creativity over commerce. When she visited for holidays or family events, she would regale us with stories of her latest projects, photographing weddings on remote Maine islands, documenting historic architecture for tourism brochures, traveling to art festivals across New England. Her visits became less frequent as the years passed, but when she did come home, she seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my progress at the company. She would ask thoughtful questions about challenges I was facing, offer sympathy when I vented about difficult employees or demanding clients, and even provide creative input on marketing ideas. "You're building something really special," she would tell me. "I'm proud of what you're accomplishing." I treasured those moments of sisterly connection, especially because they felt rare and precious. I thought we had found our balance. Me as the responsible, business-minded daughter, her as the creative, free spirit who supported my goals even if she didn't share them. What I failed to recognize was that Tessa's questions weren't coming from a place of sisterly interest. They were reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence about our company's operations, my relationships with key employees, and most importantly, my vulnerabilities and mistakes. When Dad married Patricia 5 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with genuine warmth. She seemed like exactly what Dad needed, a kind, sophisticated woman who appreciated his accomplishments and supported his goals. Patricia had been widowed young and understood the challenges of rebuilding a life after loss. She brought stability and companionship to Dad's life, and I was grateful for her presence. Tessa's relationship with Patricia appeared more complicated. During family gatherings, I noticed that they would often have long, private conversations that would end when I approached. When I asked Tessa about it, she would dismiss my curiosity. Patricia just likes to hear about my photography work. She's interested in art and culture in ways that Dad isn't. I accepted this explanation, even felt glad that Tessa had found a connection with our stepmother. I was too busy with my own responsibilities to pay close attention to the growing alliance between them, or to wonder why Patricia seemed increasingly interested in the details of company operations, despite having no official role in the business. The past year had been particularly intense as I developed my proposal for the sustainable furniture line. I had spent months researching market trends, analyzing production costs, and developing relationships with potential suppliers of eco-friendly materials. The project represented everything I had learned about the industry and my vision for the company's future. I was excited to share my progress with the family, to show Dad that I wasn't just maintaining what he had built, but actively working to expand and improve it. I thought my initiative and strategic thinking would convince him that I was ready for greater responsibility, perhaps even a formal leadership role. What I didn't realize was that my enthusiasm and detailed planning were providing Tessa with exactly the information she needed to craft her lies. Every conversation about supplier relationships became evidence of secret meetings with competitors. Every discussion of market strategy became proof of my plans to sell trade secrets. Every expression of ambition became confirmation that I was willing to betray my family for personal gain. Sitting in my car that Christmas Eve, finally seeing the pattern clearly, I understood that tonight's confrontation wasn't the result of recent discoveries about my behavior. It was the culmination of years of careful planning, strategic information gathering, and methodical relationship building. Tessa hadn't just decided to destroy me on a whim. She had been preparing for this moment for years, waiting for the perfect opportunity to eliminate me as a competition for Dad's affection and resources. And I had given her everything she needed to succeed, wrapped up in sisterly trust and delivered with a smile. But as I sat there in the cold darkness, surrounded by the ruins of my family relationships, I felt something unexpected growing alongside the pain and betrayal. Clarity. For the first time in years, I could see the situation without the filter of love and loyalty that had blinded me to Tessa's true nature. I wasn't the naive, trusting fool anymore. I was a business professional with skills in research, analysis, and strategic planning. And I was about to turn those skills toward uncovering exactly what my sister had done and finding a way to prove the truth. The game had changed, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up in my small apartment with swollen eyes and a splitting headache. But something had crystallized during the sleepless night. I wasn't going to roll over and accept this destruction of my life. If Tessa wanted to play games with evidence and documentation, then I would beat her at her strategy. My first call was to my college roommate, Lily Martinez, who now worked as a private investigator in Boston. We'd stayed close over the years, and she'd always had an uncanny ability to see through people's facades. When I explained what had happened, her response was immediate and fierce. Natalie, that's not just sibling rivalry. That's fraud. If she fabricated evidence to manipulate your father's estate decisions, she could be facing serious legal consequences. Lily's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 5 years unraveling lies for a living. I'm driving up tomorrow. Don't do anything until I get there. While waiting for Lily's arrival, I began my own investigation. I started with Tessa's social media presence, something I'd never scrutinized closely before. Her Instagram account painted the picture of a successful freelance photographer living an enviable artistic lifestyle. Gallery openings, scenic Maine landscapes, trendy Portland restaurants. But as I scrolled deeper, inconsistencies emerged. Photos supposedly taken at a wedding in Bar Harbor were geotagged in Burlington. A client meeting in Portsmouth was actually happening during a weekend when I knew she'd been visiting Dad. Most telling of all, several images of her latest photography equipment showed expensive cameras and lenses that would cost more than most freelance photographers could afford. I cross-referenced her posts with her supposed visits home, creating a timeline that revealed something disturbing. Every time Tessa claimed to be working on a major photography project, she was actually in Vermont, often staying at Dad's house for extended periods. The artistic lifestyle she portrayed online was largely fiction, which raised an obvious question. What was she actually doing with her time? When Lily arrived the day after Christmas, she took one look at my research and nodded grimly. This is methodical deception, not impulsive lies. She's been planning this for a long time. Lily spread my printouts across my kitchen table, her investigator's mind already organizing the information into patterns. The question is, what kind of evidence does she claim to have against you? That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called Patricia directly. If anyone would know the specifics of Tessa's accusations, it would be the stepmother who'd been present for every family dinner and private conversation over the past 5 years. Natalie, I'm so sorry about what happened, but her voice carried a careful quality that immediately put me on guard. Your father was very upset. Tessa showed him some very concerning documents. What kind of documents? I pressed. She hesitated. Email exchanges, meeting schedules, phone records, things that suggested you've been in contact with competitors, discussing proprietary information about our manufacturing processes. My blood ran cold. Email exchanges I never wrote, meetings I never attended, phone calls I'd never made. The scope of Tessa's deception was far more sophisticated than I had imagined. Patricia, I need you to think carefully. When did Tessa first show Dad these documents? Another pause. She's been sharing concerns about your behavior for months, Natalie. Little things at first, but they've been building. The final evidence came just last week. After ending the call, I sat staring at my phone, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Tessa hadn't just fabricated a few documents to create a single dramatic confrontation. She'd been conducting a months-long campaign to gradually poison Dad's perception of me, feeding him carefully crafted lies designed to confirm his worst fears about corporate betrayal and family disloyalty. Lily's investigation skills proved invaluable as we began tracing the digital trail. Using her access to professional databases, she started by verifying Tessa's claimed work history and client relationships. What she found was damning. Half the photography clients she lists on her website don't exist. The companies are real, but they have no record of hiring her. The wedding venues she claims to have photographed at have no events scheduled on the date she posted photos. We dug deeper into Tessa's financial records through public databases and credit reports. Despite her claims of running a successful photography business, her income was sporadic and insufficient to support the lifestyle she displayed on social media. Yet her credit card statements showed regular travel between Maine and Vermont, expensive hotel stays, and purchases of high-end technology equipment. Someone's funding this operation, Lily concluded. The question is who?
The answer came from an unexpected source. Uncle Robert called me on December 28th, his voice strained with confusion and concern. Natalie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you been having meetings with representatives from Granite State Furniture? Granite State was our biggest competitor, a New Hampshire-based company that had been trying to expand into Vermont's market for years. Absolutely not, I replied immediately. Why would you ask that? Because David showed me photographs yesterday, images of you at the Marriott in Manchester, apparently meeting with their head of business development. The photos are dated from last month. My hands started shaking. Uncle Robert, I've never been to Manchester in my life, and I certainly haven't met with anyone from Granite State. The silence on his end stretched long enough to make me nervous. Then he said quietly, Natalie, I've known you since you were born. I watched you grow up in our factory, saw you work harder than anyone to understand our business. These accusations don't match the person I know you to be. Then help me prove that, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. If there are photographs, they're fake. If there are documents, they're forgeries. Tessa has orchestrated all of this.
Uncle Robert agreed to meet me the next morning at a diner outside town, away from the family business, where we might be overheard. When he arrived, he looked haggard, as if he'd aged years in the few days since Christmas. Your father is convinced you've betrayed him, he said without preamble. He's talking about selling his shares in the company rather than risk having them fall into the wrong hands. 40 years of building something beautiful, and he's ready to destroy it rather than let you inherit control. The weight of that revelation crushed down on me. This wasn't just about my inheritance anymore. Tessa's lies were threatening to destroy the business itself, eliminating hundreds of jobs and erasing 4 generations of family legacy. Uncle Robert slid a manila envelope across the table. These are copies of everything Tessa showed your father. I made them before he could lock them away. If you're innocent, maybe you can prove these are fabricated. Inside the envelope was a collection of documents that took my breath away with their sophistication. Email printouts showing conversations between my email address and various industry contacts, discussing trade secrets and manufacturing processes. Hotel receipts and restaurant bills placing me at meetings I'd never attended. Even phone records showing calls to numbers I'd never dialed. But as I studied the evidence more carefully, I began to spot the flaws. The email headers contained subtle formatting inconsistencies. The timestamps on some documents overlapped with events where I had verifiable alibis. Most importantly, several of the supposed meetings occurred during times when I was provably elsewhere, at industry conferences, family events, or documented business trips. This is all fake, I told Uncle Robert, spreading the documents across the diner table. Look at this email, supposedly sent from my account on November 15th. I was in Boston that entire week at the New England Furniture Expo. I have hotel receipts, conference attendance records, photos with dozens of witnesses. Uncle Robert examined the documents with the careful attention to detail that had made him successful in business. Slowly, his expression changed from confusion to anger. If these are forgeries, then someone has committed a serious crime. This isn't just family drama. This is fraud designed to manipulate estate planning and business succession. We spent the next hour identifying discrepancies and inconsistencies in Tessa's fabricated evidence. Each flaw we found strengthened my case, but also deepened the horror of realizing how extensively my sister had worked to destroy me. The breakthrough came when Lily called me that afternoon with information that changed everything. I found the connection, she said, excitement evident in her voice. Tessa's been receiving regular payments from a consulting company called Strategic Communications, LLC. Guess who owns that company? My heart pounded as I waited for the answer. Patricia Morrison, your stepmother's maiden name. She's been paying Tessa $3,000 a month for the past 2 years, supposedly for family photography services. But I checked with the Vermont Secretary of State. Strategic Communications is registered as a business consulting firm, not a photography company. The conspiracy was broader and more calculating than I had imagined.
Patricia and Tessa had been working together, using Dad's grief and trust to position themselves as the true guardians of family interests, while systematically undermining my relationship with him. But their partnership had left a paper trail, and paper trails could be followed. As Lily and I continued our investigation, we uncovered a network of financial transactions, fabricated documents, and coordinated lies that painted a clear picture of premeditated fraud. More importantly, we found evidence of their real motivation. Through property records and business filings, we discovered that Patricia had been secretly negotiating with Granite State Furniture for months, discussing the potential sale of Hartwell Artisan at a price significantly below market value. If Dad sold his shares in anger and grief, Patricia stood to gain millions, while the business was gutted by competitors. Tessa's role was to eliminate me as an obstacle to those plans by destroying Dad's trust in me. With me out of the picture and Dad emotionally devastated, Patricia could position herself as the voice of reason, suggesting that selling to Granite State was the only way to preserve some value from the business. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew that simply presenting facts wouldn't be enough. Dad's anger and sense of betrayal ran too deep to be overcome by spreadsheets and financial records. I needed a strategy that would force Tessa and Patricia to reveal their deception in a way that Dad couldn't ignore or rationalize. That's when Lily suggested something that made my stomach clench with nervousness and anticipation. A confrontation where we could record Tessa admitting her lies, using her own confidence and arrogance against her. She thinks she's won, Lily explained. People who think they're untouchable often get careless about what they say. If we can get her talking, get her to brag about how clever she's been, we'll have evidence even your father can't deny. The plan was risky and required perfect timing, but it was our best chance to expose the truth before Patricia and Tessa could complete their destruction of everything my family had built. As I prepared for what would either vindicate me completely or destroy any remaining hope of salvaging my relationships, I felt a strange calm settling over me. For years, I'd bent myself into impossible shapes trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, the perfect heir to a family legacy. Now, I was about to discover whether truth and evidence could triumph over carefully crafted lies and emotional manipulation. The girl who'd spent her life protecting others was finally ready to fight for herself.
The confrontation was set for New Year's Eve, exactly 1 week after my world had imploded at Christmas dinner. Lily had orchestrated everything with the precision of a military operation. We knew Tessa would be staying at Dad's house through the holiday weekend, and Patricia always hosted a small gathering on New Year's Eve for family and close friends. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would arrive uninvited, armed with evidence, but appearing defeated and desperate. The goal was to make Tessa feel so confident in her victory that she would reveal details about her scheme, hopefully incriminating herself and Patricia in the process. Lily would be positioned outside with recording equipment, while Uncle Robert, who had agreed to help after seeing the fabricated evidence, would create opportunities for private conversations. But as I stood in my apartment that morning, putting on the same black dress I'd worn to Christmas dinner, my hands trembled with more than nervousness. This wasn't just about proving my innocence anymore. This was about exposing a conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything my family had built across 4 generations. I arrived at Dad's house at 7 o'clock, just as the first guests were arriving for Patricia's party. The same house where I'd been banished a week earlier now felt like foreign territory, despite having grown up within these walls. Through the windows, I could see the warm glow of the same Christmas lights, hear the murmur of conversation and laughter that had once meant safety and belonging. Uncle Robert answered the door, his face carefully neutral for the benefit of anyone watching. "Natalie," he said formally, "I wasn't expecting you." "I need to speak with Dad," I replied, loud enough for my voice to carry into the house. "Please, it's important." The conversation in the living room quieted as word spread that I had arrived. Within moments, Dad appeared in the foyer.
his face hard with the same anger I'd seen at Christmas. Behind him stood Patricia, elegant in a navy cocktail dress, and Tessa, wearing a satisfied smile that she quickly masked with false concern. "You're not welcome here," Dad said, his voice carrying the authority that had built a business empire. "I made that clear." "Dad, please, I know you think I betrayed our family, but I have evidence that proves I'm innocent. Just give me 5 minutes to explain." Tessa stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Dad's arm. "Natalie, this is really inappropriate. You're disrupting Patricia's party, embarrassing the family in front of guests. Can't you see that you've caused enough damage?" The calculated cruelty of her words, delivered with such convincing sincerity, reminded me exactly why I was here. But I forced myself to play the role of the desperate, defeated daughter. "I know how this looks," I said, allowing my voice to crack with emotion. "But I've lost everything. My inheritance, my place in the business, my family. If I don't clear my name, I have nothing left." Patricia stepped closer, her expression a perfect mask of sympathetic concern. "Natalie, dear, perhaps it would be better if you accepted what's happened and moved on. This obsession with proving your innocence is only making things worse for everyone." "Moved on?" I let anger creep into my voice. "Patricia, someone forged documents to make me look like a corporate spy. Someone fabricated evidence to convince my father I was selling trade secrets to competitors. I'm not moving on until I find out who did this to me." I watched carefully as Patricia and Tessa exchanged a quick glance, so brief that anyone not looking for it would have missed it entirely. But Lily had trained me to watch for these micro-expressions, these tells that revealed underlying communication between conspirators. Dad's expression softened slightly, perhaps responding to the genuine pain in my voice. "Natalie, the evidence against you was overwhelming. I didn't want to believe it, but—" "What if I could prove that evidence was fabricated?" I interrupted. "What if I could show you that someone has been systematically creating fake documents to destroy my relationship with you?" Tessa laughed, but there was a sharp edge to the sound. "Natalie, you're starting to sound paranoid. Who would go through such elaborate trouble to frame you?" "Someone who wanted me out of the picture," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "Someone who stood to gain from destroying my relationship with Dad and eliminating me as a competition for the family business." The room fell silent, except for the grandfather clock in the hallway marking the passage of time. I could see the calculation in Tessa's eyes as she weighed her response, trying to determine how much I actually knew versus how much I was guessing. Patricia broke the silence, her voice carrying a note of wounded dignity. "Natalie, I understand you're upset, but these accusations are hurtful and unfounded. We're your family. We love you. No one here would ever try to hurt you deliberately." "Then explain this," I said, pulling out my phone and showing them a photograph Lily had taken of the financial records we'd uncovered. "Strategic Communications LLC, registered to Patricia Morrison, your maiden name, Patricia, monthly payments of $3,000 to Tessa for the past 2 years, supposedly for photography services. But Strategic Communications isn't registered as a photography company, it's listed as a business consulting firm." The color drained from Patricia's face, but she recovered quickly. "I hired Tessa to document family events, create a photo archive for our history. The business registration was just for tax purposes." But Tessa's reaction was more revealing. Her confident smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by something that looked like panic before she regained control. "Natalie, you're grasping at straws. Patricia hired me for legitimate work."
$36,000 over 2 years for family photography? I pressed. That seems excessive for someone who claims to be running a successful freelance business in Maine. Uncle Robert, who had been silent during this exchange, stepped forward. "David, maybe we should hear what Natalie has to say. If there's even a possibility that the evidence against her was fabricated." "There's no possibility," Tessa interrupted, her voice rising slightly. Uncle Robert, she's desperate. She'll say anything to avoid taking responsibility for her betrayal. But I could see doubt creeping into Dad's expression. The specific details about Patricia's company and the financial payments had clearly caught him off guard. He turned to Patricia with a questioning look. Is this true about the consulting company? Patricia's composure began to crack under the scrutiny. David, it's a minor business matter. The registration was just for tax efficiency. It has nothing to do with Natalie's situation. Then why didn't you tell me about paying Tessa? Dad asked, his voice taking on the sharp tone he used when he sensed someone was being evasive in business negotiations. Because it wasn't relevant, Patricia replied, but our answer sounded rehearsed, defensive. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Dad, I have evidence that Patricia has been negotiating with Granite State Furniture about selling Hartwell Artisan. Property records show she's been in contact with their executives for months, discussing a sale price that's significantly below market value. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Dad's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, and then growing anger as he processed the implications. Patricia, he said slowly, please tell me that's not true. David, you're letting her manipulate you again. Can't you see what she's doing? She's trying to turn you against Patricia and me by making wild accusations she can't prove. But Dad was looking at Patricia with the focused intensity he brought to complex business problems. Answer the question. Have you been in contact with Granite State about selling my company? Her silence was answer enough. The mask of supportive stepmother and family protector was finally slipping, revealing the calculating opportunist underneath. There were preliminary discussions, but only because I was concerned about the family business being damaged by this situation with Natalie. I thought it might be better to explore options rather than risk everything falling apart. You thought it might be better, repeated, his voice dangerously quiet, without consulting me about my life's work. Tessa jumped in, trying to gain control of the narrative. Dad, Patricia was just trying to protect you. After Natalie's betrayal, we were worried about what might happen to the company. We wanted to make sure you had options. We? Dad's attention shifted back to Tessa. You were part of these discussions? I could see Tessa realizing she'd revealed too much, but it was too late to take back the admission. I just wanted to help, she said, but her voice lacked the conviction of her earlier lies. Help by selling my company behind my back? Dad's anger was building, his face flushing with the same rage I'd seen directed at me a week earlier. Dad, the evidence against me was fabricated. The emails, the meeting records, the phone calls, all of it was fake. Tessa created those documents to convince you I was betraying the family, clearing the way for Patricia to sell the business to competitors. That's not true, Tessa snapped, but her denial sounded shrill, desperate. I would never... I've been planning this for years, I continued, my voice gaining strength as I saw her facade crumbling. You've been planning this since college. Tessa's face was flushed now, her carefully maintained composure completely gone. You don't know what you're talking about. I worked hard to build my career. What career? Half your supposed clients don't exist. Your income records show you've been barely surviving on Patricia's payments and Dad's occasional gifts. The successful photographer lifestyle is as fake as the evidence you created against me. Stop it, Tessa screamed, her mask finally falling away completely. You think you're so perfect, so deserving of everything Dad built. You never considered that maybe I wanted a chance too, that maybe I was tired of being the forgotten daughter who got nothing while you got handed a fortune. The admission rang through the room like a gunshot. Dad stared at his younger daughter with horror and disbelief, finally seeing the resentment and jealousy that had driven her to such elaborate deception. But Tessa wasn't finished. Her anger and frustration poured out in a torrent of bitter honesty that destroyed any remaining hope of maintaining her innocent facade. You want to know the truth? Fine.
Yes, I created those documents. Yes, I've been planning this for years. And yes, Patricia and I have been working together to protect this family from your selfish ambition. You would have run the company into the ground with your stupid environmental initiatives and feel-good policies. At least Granite State knows how to run a real business. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face had gone ashen, his hands trembling as he processed the scope of the betrayal. Patricia was staring at Tessa with horror, realizing that her co-conspirator had just confessed to everything in front of witnesses.
Uncle Robert was the first to speak, his voice cold with disgust. Tessa, do you realize what you've just admitted to? Document forgery? Fraud? Conspiracy to manipulate estate planning? These are serious crimes. But I was focused on Dad, watching as 40 years of trust and love crumbled in his eyes. He looked at Tessa as if seeing her for the first time, then turned his gaze to Patricia with an expression of such profound betrayal that I almost felt sorry for them. "Get out," he said quietly. "Both of you. Get out of my house and don't ever come back." The reckoning had finally arrived, but as I watched my family disintegrate in real time, I realized that victory felt nothing like I'd expected it would. The aftermath of Tessa's confession unfolded with the swift brutality of an avalanche. Within hours of that New Year's Eve confrontation, Lily had delivered the recorded audio to both the Burlington Police Department and the Vermont Attorney General's office. By January 2nd, fraud charges were filed against both Tessa and Patricia, with additional charges of conspiracy and attempted theft by deception. Dad sat in his study for 3 days straight after that night, barely eating, speaking to no one. Uncle Robert and I took turns checking on him, but he seemed lost in a grief deeper than anything I'd witnessed since Mom's death. The man who had built an empire through decisive action and clear thinking was paralyzed by the magnitude of the betrayal he'd enabled. 40 years, he said to me on the 4th day, his voice hollow as he stared out the window at the maple trees where Tessa and I had once played as children. 40 years I spent building something meaningful, and I nearly destroyed it all because I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I sat beside him in the leather chair that had been my grandfather's, then his, and would someday be mine. "Dad, you manipulated you with surgical precision. This wasn't a failure of judgment. This was calculated psychological warfare designed to exploit your love for family." He turned to look at me then, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and regret. "Natalie, I threw away my relationship with my daughter based on lies. I ordered you out of this house, told you that you were no longer my child. How do I come back from that?" The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure either of us was ready to cross. The hurt was still there, sharp and deep, along with the bewildering trauma of having my entire reality upended in a single evening. But underneath the pain was something else, a recognition that we had both been victims of the same elaborate deception. "We come back from it by rebuilding," I said finally, "by acknowledging what happened, learning from it, and creating something stronger." The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed. Tessa's confession, combined with the mountain of evidence Lily and I had assembled, made prosecution straightforward. She pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation and restitution payments totaling nearly $200,000. Patricia's case was more complex. Her lawyers attempted to argue that she had been manipulated by Tessa, that her involvement in the conspiracy was minimal, but the financial records told a different story. The payments to Tessa, the secret negotiations with Granite State Furniture, the systematic undermining of family relationships, all of it painted a picture of someone who had entered our family with predetermined goals of financial exploitation. She received a 3-year sentence and was ordered to forfeit all claims to Dad's estate, including the house she had shared with him for 5 years. The divorce proceedings were swift and merciless, handled by the same attorneys who had built Hartwell Artisan into a regional powerhouse. But the legal victories felt hollow compared to the work of rebuilding trust and repairing relationships that had been damaged by years of manipulation.
Dad and I began meeting regularly, not just as father and daughter, but as business partners working to heal an organization that had been shaken by scandal and betrayal. The first challenge was addressing the damage to company morale. News of the fraud had spread quickly through our small industrial community, and employees were understandably concerned about the stability of their jobs. Dad and I held a series of town hall meetings, explaining what had happened and outlining our plans for moving forward. The Hartwell family has faced challenges before, Dad told our assembled workforce in the main production facility. We survived the recession of 2008, the supply chain disruptions of recent years, and we'll survive this too, because this company isn't built on the ambitions of any single person. It's built on the skill and dedication of everyone in this room. Uncle Robert played a crucial role in stabilizing operations during the transition period. His steady presence and deep knowledge of company operations provided continuity while Dad and I worked through our personal reconciliation. More importantly, his willingness to stand up for truth during the crisis had prevented irreversible damage to the business itself. "I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper," he told me one afternoon as we reviewed financial projections in the conference room. "I've watched you grow up in this business, seen your dedication and integrity firsthand. When those accusations came out, they just didn't match the person I knew you to be."
The sustainable furniture initiative that had been weaponized against me became the foundation for our company's revival. With Tessa's lies exposed and Patricia's sabotage eliminated, we were free to pursue the environmental innovations I'd been developing. The timing proved fortuitous. Post-pandemic consumer consciousness about sustainability had created exactly the market demand I'd projected. Within 6 months, our eco-friendly product line was generating orders that exceeded our most optimistic projections. The irony wasn't lost on me that the initiative Tessa had used to frame me as a traitor became the key to securing our family's legacy for the next generation. But success in business couldn't heal all the wounds left by the betrayal. The relationship with Tessa was permanently severed. She had chosen her path, and the consequences were hers to bear. I felt no satisfaction in her imprisonment, but neither did I feel any obligation to forgive someone who had systematically worked to destroy my life for years. Dad struggled more with the loss of both Patricia and Tessa. Despite everything they had done, he had loved them, and letting go of that love required a grief process that couldn't be rushed or minimized. We both started therapy, individually and together, to work through the complex emotions surrounding family betrayal and manipulation. "I keep questioning every memory," Dad confided during one of our joint sessions. "Every conversation with Patricia, every concern Tessa raised about you. I'm second-guessing all of it, wondering what was real and what was calculated manipulation." Dr. Sarah Chen, our family therapist, helped us understand that this kind of comprehensive doubt was normal after experiencing such systematic deception. When someone has been lying to you for years, it's natural to question your ability to judge character and situations accurately. The goal isn't to become paranoid, but to develop better tools for recognizing manipulation in the future. The healing process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments when the accumulated hurt seemed too deep to overcome. But there were also breakthroughs, conversations that reached new levels of honesty, shared experiences that began rebuilding trust, and small victories that reminded us why our relationship was worth fighting for. One of the most significant changes was in how we approached family decisions and business planning. The conspiracy had succeeded partly because of the way our family had traditionally operated, with implicit trust, minimal documentation, and informal communication about important matters. We implemented new systems that required transparency and accountability, while still preserving the personal relationships that made working together meaningful. "We're not just preventing future deception," I explained to a business management class at the University of Vermont, where I'd been invited to speak about family business dynamics. "We're creating structures that make our decision-making process stronger and more inclusive." The speaking engagement led to others, and I found myself becoming an unexpected advocate for fraud prevention in family businesses. The story of what Tessa and Patricia had done resonated with other business owners who had experienced similar betrayals, and I began consulting with families who wanted to protect themselves from internal threats.
A year after the New Year's Eve confrontation, Dad officially named me as his successor, but the announcement felt different than either of us had expected it would. Instead of a simple transfer of power from father to daughter, it was a partnership forged through adversity and strengthened by survival. Natalie has earned this position not just through her business acumen and dedication, but through her integrity under pressure and her commitment to protecting what our family has built across 4 generations. The applause from our employees, suppliers, and community partners felt like vindication, but more importantly, it felt like acceptance. I was no longer the daughter who might someday inherit the business. I was the leader who had proven herself when it mattered most. As I stood at the podium that day, looking at faces that represented not just my professional future, but my chosen family of colleagues and collaborators, I thought about how different this moment was from what I had imagined a year earlier. The path to this point hadn't been the smooth transition of power I'd expected, but a crucible that had tested every aspect of my character and capabilities. Tessa's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also freed me from the illusion that family love was unconditional, or that biological relationships automatically deserved trust and loyalty. I had learned to distinguish between the family you're born into and the family you choose. And sometimes those are very different things. The business continued to thrive under our new leadership structure. Uncle Robert remained as Chief Operating Officer, bringing stability and institutional knowledge. I took on the role of CEO, focusing on strategic planning and market expansion. Dad transitioned to chairman of the board, providing guidance and wisdom while stepping back from day-to-day operations. But perhaps the most important change was in how we defined success. It wasn't just about profit margins or market share. It was about building something that could withstand both external challenges and internal threats. Something worthy of the trust placed in us by employees, customers, and community. 6 months ago, I received a letter from Tessa in prison. She had been participating in a rehabilitation program focused on accountability and making amends, and her counselor had encouraged her to reach out. The letter was filled with apologies and explanations, regret, and pleas for eventual forgiveness.
I read it once, then filed it away without responding. Some betrayals are too comprehensive to forgive, and some relationships are too damaged to repair. That doesn't make me vindictive or heartless. It makes me realistic about the consequences of choices and the value of my own peace of mind. Today, as I write this story, Hartwell Artisan Furniture employs 230 people, has expanded into 3 new markets, and is recognized as a leader in sustainable manufacturing practices. Dad and I have dinner together every Sunday, a tradition that has become one of my favorite parts of the week. If you had asked me 2 years ago whether I would trade the pain of that Christmas Eve betrayal for a different path to this position, I would have said yes without hesitation. Today, I'm not so sure. The experience taught me things about resilience, discernment, and the difference between family loyalty and family manipulation that I could never have learned any other way. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing that happens next. Sometimes, betrayal, as devastating as it feels, clears away illusions that were preventing you from seeing your own strength. And sometimes, when someone shows you who they really are, the most powerful thing you can do is believe them and build your life accordingly.